Great. We are switching gears again. We've had a lot of schedule changes today, so we'll be kind of going back and forth. There'll be some testimony and then a bill introduction a little bit later. So again, just thank you to the committee for being flexible. We now have Kaya Morris, who's with the Land Access and Opportunity Board, and she will be testifying on H772, an act relating to residential rental agreements, eviction procedures, and the creation of the positive rental payment credit reporting pilot program. Thank you so much. I don't believe you've come to our committee before, so we'll really quickly go around and introduce ourselves and then give you the floor.
Thank
you. Dodge, I want to start, sorry.
Hi, Leonora Dodge. We've met before. Essex Town, City of Essex Junction. Hope you're doing well.
Joe Parsons, Newbury, Thompson, and Groton.
Hi, Tom Charlton, Athens, Chester, Grafton, and Wyndham.
Debbie Dolgan, St. Johnsbury, Concord, and Kirby.
Gail Pezzo, Chittenden 20, Colchester.
Mary Howard, Rutland City, District 6.
Sadia Lamont, Lamoille, Washington District. Welcome.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax, Georgia, and we have our lovely Rep Burrows on Zoom.
Good morning, Kaya. I am at home in Windsor 1, Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Great, thank you all. Hi, everyone. For the record, my name is Kaya Morris. I am the Secure Housing Coach for the Land Access and Opportunity Board. As a private citizen, I am a resident of Colchester, Vermont. So I was asked today to come and speak to the overarching themes of what's happening in 772, which I see as kind of a growth that's come out of previous legislation. I believe that Representative Lamont and several others signed on to one. It was 440. So there's kind of like a contrast and comparison and contrast to, I think, trying to address some different issues that are coming up with regards to landlord-tenant relations. Now, I know it is slightly unconventional in its own way, and it's sort of novel to have both myself speaking as I am representing, I'm recognizing all the hats that I wear within this building and within the communities, but also the typically we have Ornella Mata Figueroa and Jean Hamilton, who are the co-directors, who are typically our advocates in this space. However, I was asked to come speak today as I have direct personal experience with navigating some of the issues that these bills are both trying to address. So it is of great importance for the Land Access and Opportunity Board, as you all are familiar with them, as an entity and familiar with the work that we do, that we are really trying to increase the ability for communities that have been left out of opportunities to both have access to land and to housing to do so in a meaningful, dignified way that increases our economic viability and creates opportunities for lasting relationships and people being able to feel that the place that they live, work, and play is of their own. What we've seen happen within the housing market, as you all are very aware as well with these bills, is that we've seen a lot of artificial pressures that have created a powder keg of experiences that people have had that have made it seem in some ways untenable to live here in Vermont unless you are a property owner. So as we are looking at expanding our housing opportunities, as we're looking at building new properties, these types of thorny questions are very, very important, and the LAOB definitely has an invested stake in seeing how these develop. So I'll speak to you now from my personal experience as it relates to this, these bills and some of the things that are being proposed, if I may be given permission to do that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I've been living in Vermont since 2008. So we're coming close to my 20th anniversary of being in this great state. And in the year 2020 was a time of great displacement for my family. And we moved up into the Chittenden County region, as this was an area that we wanted to move to and try to start a new life up in this part of the state, coming from southern Vermont, where we had been for several years prior. What I want you to understand about why that is important is that we came into an opportunity to rent a beautiful space. It was brand new construction. We were literally the first tenants. And this was a property that was owned by a property owner who has several pieces of property across Vermont, but does not actually reside here. They reside in the I believe out in Maryland, near the Baltimore area. So all the same, they own a nice swath of properties in the Mallett's Bay community over in Colchester, Vermont. What happened was we all came in, and many of us, some people have been living there for various points of time. But there came a point in the housing market when you started to see all of these no-cause evictions taking place, as you're well aware. You saw this sort of explosion of sudden landlords saying, we want to sell our properties, we want to raise our rents, we want to find ways to use the mechanisms that are there to make our business interests work out for the best in a way that was really divorcing the fact that there were human beings and people that had human and civil rights and experiences in that whole process. It was a frenzy. It was literally a frenzy. And I came back from work and found my neighbors surrounding my car, knowing that I had done much work in political advocacy and asking, oh my gosh, are we all being evicted? Because everyone had received a notice to vacate. There were over a dozen homes in that one area. And this is actually something that's happened a few times with this family in the past, that have owned these properties, of sort of like upheaving the whole community and then putting new folks in there again. So this was not terribly unfamiliar, unfortunately, to housing advocates at the time. But everyone received this sort of like janky notice to vacate that didn't really have anything. It wasn't, there was no certifications on it at all, no notarized at all. Just told we're not renewing your lease because we're selling the properties. This left all of these people in this one little tight-knit community to have to then scramble to try to find housing in an untenable market. So my family was part of that group. We were given an option for first right of refusal to purchase, but really saying, can you now purchase this $800,000 valued home after renting it for a year without notice, in a way that gives you the ability to start building the type of capital that can enable you to stay in the place that you were calling home? Absolutely impossible. So people scrambled. They purchased properties under duress. They were not the ones, they didn't get to buy their dream homes. They bought what was available, because this is what we saw happen. Then just a few years later, in another rental property, once again, trying to find a place that we can call home. And understand as well that I have a child who is a youth, who is autistic and had been through severe PTSD through many different things that had happened in his young life. And so having a sense of place and of home was really, truly important. And it is a value that you hear from the disability community that is really crucial for feeling stability within one's life experience. We were once again faced with a situation where this landlord had their own personal reasons as to why they wanted to do this, but gave a quick notice to vacate. You're going to need to leave. We cannot renew your lease. Once again, which seems reasonable in a reasonable market, in a reasonable rentals marketplace, in a reasonable housing purchase opportunity space. Those things were not actually available. We know they have not been. Those pressures have been too great. So once again, scrambling to try to find a place, recognizing that the child might have to be removed from the school where they had been receiving direct supports through their IEP, recognize all of that upheaval that was going to happen again, and then finding another place. Then once again, paying substantial rents for a space in Burlington, and within less than a year, once again, be giving another notice to vacate because we're going to sell the properties. Now, what kept happening with this over and over again is not just the psychic and somatic things that are happening. There's actual physical loss. There's a financial cost. Each time moving, costing between $5,000 to $7,000, money that is never recouped, money that is not supported through zero financial incentives or any kind of ways, nothing given other than to say, I'm making this financial investment while you have put in sometimes up to $40,000 a year into my investment. I am actually having no obligations to do anything for you or your family for this business decision that I'm making that I solely receive the benefits of. The tenant receives no benefits other than to have a place to stay, which is actually a human right, right? So it creates this just really difficult scenario. And so even the place that I'm speaking to you from today, I received this rental within 2 hours. It went from listing to applying to being invited to sign a lease within 2 hours. I'm looking for where that is providing a reasonable mechanism for someone who, throughout no fault of their own, is going to be thrust into a marketplace that is not ready to absorb them, right? So we need to come up with better options that are here. Going back and looking between the two bills, I'm not going to get deep into policy analysis because we do utilize a process within the Land Access and Opportunity Board that provides for our board members to give input on multiple proposals that we have. And we have not had a chance to get into this. However, there are names that are associated with these bills within representatives that are there as well within your body that have been a part of these processes throughout the last several years. So when I'm looking at these bills, I'm looking at
Oh, you're muted. Oh,
thank you for that. Not
I'm
sure.
sorry.
No, I appreciate you stopping me and finding that space. So if we were to look into 772, for example, there are some components that it looked like they were trying to make a move towards finding ways to mitigate some of the harm that happens within no cause evictions. Again, recognizing these are folks that are perfectly fine. They're not doing anything that would have a finding for an eviction in a court of law, but are being, again, it's just displaced into an artificial market. So there were some things that I think were helpful, but some of it could actually feel a bit more restrictive in a way that will be untenable. So there were some changes, some shortening of the dates of notification that are definitely problematic. What I also want you to recognize, when I had that first story of being in Colchester and having my neighbors come to me, again, these were not notifications delivered by certified mail. They did not have anything legal. Actually, they were not even signed. The notices to vacate were not even, they didn't even have a signature. However, the panic, the rush, the concern, the financial scrambles were very real for all of the folks that were impacted by it. And everyone treated it as though it was actually law, because most tenants do not know their rights. And even if we had, the tenant rights are actually not robust enough to really have protected them in any way in this particular scenario. So looking at some of the notification dates and the shrinking of those, there was originally, I think there was some language that folks were moving towards of saying, depending on the length of the lease you've had, it could be helpful to give people more time. Again, once again, if somebody has been settled into a space, they did not come into this space with the expectation, in a year, I will have to leave. I don't know very many people who do that, unless that is a part of their life's journey. Perhaps they're moving, perhaps they're going to school, different things like that. But most folks, most families do not move into a space with the intention of coming back out at the end of a short-term lease or a one-year lease. So recognizing that folks that have been here and have invested in that landlord, that property owner's property, paying down their mortgage and paying into their taxes without receiving any kind of supports is kind of problematic. So I'd love to have the committee on a personal level go back to look at the language that was in 440. That was introduced last year, as it did speak to some really specific and I think helpful ways of building a better relationship between landlords and tenants, so that this tension is not there and solutions can be creatively found. But in this sort of restrictive kind of components of what we have within 772, I'm still concerned that we will not only continue to have that gulf between the property owners and the people who are investing in their property as tenants, to only widen that gap and keep us away from finding creative solutions. Through the work that I do with the Land Access and Opportunity Board, we are trying to find new mechanisms of looking at shared equity, looking at ways that if a person has a sense of place, it can be a place they can call home. And so that also helps to remove some of the burden, and it also helps to remove some of the pressure that some of these owners may be experiencing that is causing them to utilize a system that most folks would not have found to be terribly ethical prior to the pandemic if it had not become a regular practice, right? That is why it was not used. So I say that to say there's much more that can be done. And I do feel I like personally, and I'm not speaking for the LAOB, this is Kaya Morris, resident of Colchester, speaking and saying, as someone who has had this lived experience, 440 touches on some really promising things that I think could really shift the conversation between it being so adversarial between landlords and tenants and the relationship, the financial relationship that they are building with one another. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Please, please.
So definitely, again, I think one of the ways that we're trying to move forward with this conversation is kind of looking at all of the landlord tenant bills. So we've kind of gone back and forth to looking at all the bills. I want to get your take on 772, where we're trying to look at no cause a little bit differently, change that. And I believe the language that we have in there currently is if a landlord is making a decision and it's of no fault to the tenant,
Mhm.
that the landlord needs to give 90 days.
Mhm.
Is that, do you feel that that's a reasonable notice period? Do you think it should be longer? You know, I would love to get your take on that.
I think it could be reasonable, but it has to be paired with something else because there's still, we still need to recognize. So if I get a 90-day notice, let's say I find a space that might work for me tomorrow, I need to be able to have that money up front to be able to put down for all of those new costs. So it doesn't, the length of time, what it does is it buys the individual a possible opportunity to potentially save up what's going to be required for them to be able to vacate per the landlord's desires. What I liked that I saw in 440, I believe there was language that spoke specifically to when we're getting to that crossroads, is there a mechanism for how the landlords could work cooperatively with that tenant on some of that financial burden? Because again, they're assuming a financial, they're receiving nothing. They're getting nothing back. The tenant receives zero benefits in this relationship other than having a place to stay during that duration. Past that point, there's nothing that goes to help them. So that could be helpful, I think, as an additional piece, because even at that then tells me that I have to completely shift my whole life and find money that I may not have had or had to expect that I would have to have in place. So the length of time is important, but there's also things that need to happen during that period of activity in order to make it possible for that person to move to the next place. There was something I saw that came, it was not in this bill. Was it in this? Oh, this was a long bill. So this is a long bill, so I will not pretend that I have gone through line by line. I think that there's also, let me stop there. I'm going to stop there. I apologize. I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you. Go ahead.
So I guess this is a question for just floating this idea. What really resonated was the reality you highlighted of even in the best of scenarios, even a yearly move is very tough, especially on families with kids. I recognize that. I know that in a lot of scenarios, people will do, like you can't outright buy a property or buy land, but you get these like very long leases. And I'm not suggesting we do like a, Hong Kong 99-year lease, but something longer than 1 year with the added notice. I don't know whether that's to kind of cement a little bit the acknowledgement, like this is the kind of lease that we are looking to give and that I am looking to sign on to as a tenant, to just kind of have eyes a little bit more wide open. It's something that I know we haven't proposed this before, and it's not something that I've specifically heard from like tenant advocates or regular folks. And I don't know how landlords would feel about it, but I think that to some way it just provides a little bit of that stability that we're trying to achieve.
I appreciate you asking that, Representative. I think, looking at a length of a lease could be a really helpful mechanism. And I think that perhaps if there are certain conditions around why a landlord might not want to pursue that those again can be articulated. I think, again, having a sense of place is one of the most important things that we can do, and recognizing the mental health impacts of what happens when one is displaced from their home is significant. It's nothing to be not considered. There's it's been documented very well how very detrimental to both one's mental health and as well as their performance within the workplace within their employment, all that instability creates a number of pressures, that can really place an individual in a precarious situation. And so effectively having a longer lease, I think, would be a really wonderful opportunity. But I do understand the pressures on some levels of what landlords feel, where they're just like, but I don't want to be bound into a person for 2 years. Again, you have existing landlord tenant laws and existing eviction processes, which have always been there and will remain there for many, many years, then without much change or modification. That would still, you don't lose that ability to say, if I'm looking into this 7 months in and this is just not going to work out, there's just too much that's happening, too many violations of the lease, so on and so forth. You still have a legal mechanism to do that, but considering that could be helpful. So I appreciate you naming that.
Elizabeth, and then we'll get to you, Ben.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Excellent. I have a couple of questions for you. First, as a person with lived experience, when you moved into that first apartment in Colchester, or that first, I don't know if it was an apartment or a house, when you moved into that first property, did you have to provide, what kind of a deposit did you have to provide?
Yes, so it was first month's rent and then last month, equivalent of 1 month's rent for deposit.
So first and last, but not first, last, and deposit.
No.
Okay.
No. I believe that had already, now that was in Burlington only. Sorry, Burlington Charter.
No, it's okay. I wondered whether when you were given notice to move out, were you able to access the deposit?
No, not until we moved out. It was sent 3 weeks after we moved. So those funds were held.
One of my concerns is now, my next question really applies to your professional role. One of my concerns is the first, last, and deposit problem. People are given, especially people who are behind on their rent, but in any circumstance, coming up with first, last, and deposit while you're straddling residences, I think is really hard. And I wondered whether professionally, you know of any landlords who terminate a lease and also give their tenants access to their deposit so that they can roll it forward into a new unit.
I will say that I'm not, but that is something that I have on a personal level. It makes a lot of sense to me. I think because if we're understanding correctly, those deposits are supposed to be held in an account. They're not supposed to be spent down. So they are supposed to be held in an account, which may be potentially also accruing interest. And so the tenant also gets none of that interest off of that as well. I think that could be a way to think about that in the same way you might hold your taxes in escrow on a mortgage. Right. So it's there for you to be able to use it when you need it. There's nothing built in for tenants for that type of a disruption. There's no, you know what I mean? Even if there was something, some portion of the rent or something like that, that was able to come back and be able to be available to them when it is time for them to go. I think, again, it could once again change those relationships and make it to be one that's not just as transactional, but we're straddling this investment together, and I'm trying to have you land on your feet, and I want to be in good shape at the end of all of this as well as an owner. So I think that could be a potential solution. I don't have those specifics though about examples. I think legal aid might have that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious about if the landlord goes to sell, is there a time frame with first right of refusal?
As I understand it, first right of refusal is not. It's not actually a legally bound thing. It's almost a gentleman's handshake, quote unquote. As I understand it from other property owners and people who are in realty, it's something you can offer. It's not something that is required. And it means that you also need to be able to meet the highest bid for whatever the sale is. So as the tenant, I need to be able to at least meet or exceed whatever the highest bid is for that property. But recognizing again that because you've entered into a contract to sell it, I may have already vacated that property. I may have to vacate that property before the closing of the sale happens. So there's still a gap that doesn't really sustain for an ability for somebody to actually have a secure place. I do know of a mom that has been trying to purchase for almost 2 years now. and has not been able to find suitable property. And so she ended up in a really sticky situation as well, where she was facing a no cost eviction, trying to buy into the marketplace, as we're all supposed to want to do, but was not able to find the right home for her family. So I appreciate you asking that, and I think that that's definitely a place to try to find a solution around.
Thank you.
Two quick points. I can't remember which bills that we've talked about that does have that language. I think is either 399 or 440. If I am remembering correctly, I think the time period is 80 days.
Mm-hmm.
Please do not quote me, but I believe in the language that we've had in front of us, it's 80 days. And I just want to make a point that currently in landlord tenant law, a landlord has 14 days after move out to return your security deposit either in full, and if you are not getting your full security deposit back, it has to be itemized.
Mm-hmm.
If you do not receive it within the 14 days,
Mm-hmm.
you are entitled to get your entire security deposit back, regardless of what the landlord had wanted to charge you or kind of withhold.
Due to damage or anything that,
Yeah.
Right.
And that's regardless. So if
how many days?
14. So if by day 15, you don't have anything, you get the whole thing back.
Mhm.
So just,
Which is still helpful, but also after when the person will have had no vacation.
and I don't think that's come up in our committee discussions before. So I think it was a good, thank you, Elizabeth, for bringing it up and a good part of our conversation to have. We do have 5 minutes before Rep. Chena does an introduction of his bill. Are there any other questions, comments? Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Just as you think about it, going forward, one of the things that we're trying to address are the number of small landholders who are apprehensive about making the one unit they have available. And that's largely because of that 1 in 20 or 30 possible bad tenant that in their case could result in them losing their home if they're renting because they need the income. What we're looking for is a way to give those landlords enough confidence to bring some of those units back out of short-term rental and into long-term rental, so that there are more options available for people who need a rental apartment. So if you think of ways that it's very, very hard to isolate the problem from the healthy tenants. And we're really trying to find a way to give that some definition so we're not causing problems to good tenants, which is most of them, and giving enough confidence that there's protections against a problematic tenant that a small landholder can absorb and kind of navigate. So if you have recommendations along those lines, we are searching.
I think, if I may, Representative, I think what can be really helpful there as well is we're thinking about adding a value to whether or not someone is a good tenant. That can be really, really challenging because someone can pay well, they can take care of the property, and there's still kind of arbitrary things that determine whether or not you're a good tenant. Recognizing how many people may have troubling credit. It may not be perfect credit. It may be troubling credit for a variety of reasons, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily won't pay their rent. That doesn't mean they won't be great tenants. That doesn't mean that they would not do a wonderful job protecting your investment. There also becomes an additional added pressure that happens for folks that are not, if everybody had perfect credit and all the money in the world, why would we rent? We would go ahead and purchase property, right? So there's a whole lot of people that are trying to build themselves up financially in the ways that we're encouraged to do that can't do it because they're pushed out of that market. So just recognizing as you're kind of trying to define that small minority of folks that are, are hot spotters, just like we have in crime and different places like that. When we look at our statistics that way, we recognize that most of them are not. And even those who are not the perfect tenant on paper are probably just fine. So recognizing as well, there's a nice cluster of folks who can't get property for a variety of reasons, and they also deserve a place to live.
It's difficult to screen ahead of time. It's usually after the fact that
That
the
you find
problems begin
Yeah.
to emerge, and that's the point at which we're trying to.
Yeah.
The one landowner doesn't owe it to anybody to rent their unit, and right now they're not.
No,
For
no.
sure,
And
because it pays
Correct.
more and it's less hassle. So it's another way of bringing short term.
yes,
As I'm
yes,
looking, trying to bring more of these units online, we need
yes.
a lot of them.
We do. And we need tenants that are able to pay, and we need tenants that are great. And we also need to recognize that the tenant is investing in your property. They are making an investment. That's a huge chunk of their salary, typically, that they're placing in your care for your
Yes.
property.
A large
So it is
portion
a
of that
reciprocal
is
relationship.
spent.
So we're trying to do a better job, I think, of it, rather than it being so transactional, recognizing that, like, yeah, if I can invest $40,000 in a company every year, I definitely wouldn't need to rent, but I'm not. So I'm instead giving that money, I'm putting that money in trust with you. So we can find a way to build a better relationship, I think, so that it
Great.
feels less scary.
Thank you so much. Elizabeth, do you want to kind of conclude this portion of our morning?
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I just have one quick question. To your knowledge, is there any way to discern a bad landlord?
Oh, yeah. But we don't have a rental registry. That keeps getting voted down to have a rental registry in the state where folks, thank you for that, Representative Burrows. I know that there have been efforts to create a rental registry so that people can keep track, because that is also the question too, is right. So is the tenant okay? But also there are many tenants that also get into that relationship, find out 3-4 months later, this is going to be a challenge for me as well. Right. So understanding those folks, it's other than word of mouth, other than a Facebook page is like, are you renting this person? From this person, we don't have a way in the state of seeing what happens or paying attention to the trends. Is this something that particular property owner does for multiples of their property? Are they constantly pushing people through? You might want to know that data. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, committee.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We now will be again, going to a introduction of H 826 and act relating to land access and opportunity, sponsored by Rep. Chena.
Hello. Does that mean it's my turn?
It is your turn, my friend.
Okay. So forgive me because I'm bouncing between, like, we were in house healthcare and I'm on Zoom there, and so I'm just adjusting to being on Zoom here. So hold on. So
Thank you for being on Zoom here. We appreciate it.
okay. So I'm gonna pull up just to keep me. What do I have? Like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour? Just kidding.
I would say.
You're halfway done.
I'd say 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah, I think 10 minutes is sufficient. I was teasing about the hour.
Oh, trust me, we could probably talk for an hour.
I think we could talk about the topic for an hour. If I talk about this bill for an hour, that's not cool. So, so let me just pull up the, I think if I did a walkthrough for an hour is what I'm saying, that would not be cool. So, because it would just be boring. I think a discussion on this issue is far more interesting. But I'm pulling it up on the website. I'm assuming that folks there can see this on their computers themselves, and you don't need me to share the screen. And so I'm trying to just adjust the window here so I can see both you and the bill. Here I'm almost there. I'm a little out of practice with the Zoom, like this Zoom juggling. We used to be had gotten really skilled at this at one point. Like, you could put what you're reading right in front of your camera, and then it looks like you're looking at the people, but you're reading. So H 826 is an act relating to land access and opportunity. And I'm not going to give you a full walkthrough because Ledge Council could do that if you choose to. I would hope that maybe you'd give 15 minutes for Ledge Council to do that at some point, just to give it a formal walkthrough, because I think there's pieces of this bill that if you choose not to act on this bill, there's pieces that may fit into other work that you're doing. And that would be my minimum ask, is that the committee consider hearing my presentation and hearing from the Land Access and Opportunity Board, and considering if this bill as its own vessel doesn't move, could some of the contents of this vessel be included in another? So I will read the intent of the bill because I think that's important to read to you now. It's the intent of the Vermont General Assembly to support the human right to housing and to promote public health and community safety by preserving affordable housing and creating new social and economic opportunities for the development and maintenance of sustainable, resilient, and affordable housing infrastructure. It is the intent of this act to focus state, municipal, and private resources on ensuring that Vermonters have an adequate supply of safe, secure housing, including more opportunities for access to and ownership of land and community resources. The findings section I'm not going to spend time on in detail because it's detailed, and I think that's more of a ledge council walkthrough. And also, actually, I would encourage you to hear from the staff of the Land Access and Opportunity Board. I didn't say this at the beginning. I'm here as the lead sponsor, and the two lead sponsors of the bill, myself and Representative Karis Duncan, are actually appointed to the board, to the Land Access and Opportunity Board. I'm appointed by the National Association of Social Workers Vermont chapter, and Representative Karis Duncan is appointed by Everytown, Vermont. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I think you should know my connection to the board is more than just writing the bill. I'm on the policy committee, and also that our staff at the board. So when I say our staff, then it'll make more sense why I'm saying our staff, because I feel responsible for caring for our staff, that they could speak more to these findings than I could, because these findings were written by the staff based on their work. Because as you see in the findings, it refers to a variety of documents. It refers to the Vermont State Health Improvement Plan. It refers to the Cannabis Control Board report. It refers to the Road Home, a plan for creating permanent, affordable, and service-supported housing for Vermonters who participate in developmental disability services. So that's a document that was created by another committee that existed, the State Housing and Residential Services Planning Committee. That's what they actually called. And then it refers in the findings to the Food Security in Vermont Roadmap to 2035. And so these various documents represent work that the body has enacted to explore the issue of housing in the context of being a social determinant or driver of health. You can see here that from different angles, that various bodies have recommended investment and policy changes that align with the work of the Land Access and Opportunity Board, in some cases specifically referring to the board, in others referring to the work or the intent of the board. And so what the staff did here is they drew from some of the partnerships they've built to show evidence of how there have been from many sources a call to action for increasing access to land and opportunity in ways that we attempted in this bill. And so I think that's my brief way of trying to at least honor the findings without getting into the details. Because I think if I read them in detail, it's going to open this can of worms that we don't have time for right now. And that would be better managed by our staff, because they could then speak to why they included this, and it would give them a chance to articulate their work in greater depth. So I will move on to the actual meat of the bill, what it does. So you heard the intent and findings. So the section 3, it adds to existing statute language that would create a Land Access and Opportunity Fund. The original bill that led to the creation of the Land Access and Opportunity Board included a fund attached to the board. And the point was that there would be a fund that would be replenished through various mechanisms, public and private, that could be used for the work of the Land Access and Opportunity Board. And now that the board has existed for a few years, we feel that it's time to have a fund, so that there's a place where money can go and be managed from, and where private money can flow to as well. As the community catches on to our work, there's a lot of interest in supporting it. So it also, I'm just gonna scroll through then, and it adds the fund into existing statute. Then it adds a component of like a new section. I believe this is here. I could be wrong. This is where you need ledge counsel to just clarify how it fits in. But this Land Access and Opportunity Fund report section, it talks about the purpose, the use of the fund, and that's really what I would like to speak to now. So we say that this fund could be used for the following activities: the purchase of buildings and land by current tenants to expand access to owner-occupied housing. That piece fits into some of your work this year so far when you're looking at the experience of tenants. How you can figure out, but I know it fits in based on what I've seen you working on so far. The next section, the renovation of owner-occupied multi-unit housing to expand access to housing. Third, the development of housing infrastructure for land owned through a residential cooperative or other form of collective ownership, and for the development of transitional housing. It also asks that the board prioritize funding for the following kinds of projects: create self-sufficient neighborhoods and communities that use intersectional and circular designs such as localized waste management, regenerative agricultural practices, and independent energy generation. Develop sustainable social and physical infrastructure that expands access to community resources such as tool banks, labor pools, workforce training programs, disaster relief, and other resilience strategies. And third, a reminder that we're to prioritize members from historically marginalized or disadvantaged communities, and we give language here that goes further than our originating statute. We clarify that people who are experiencing homelessness, substance use disorder, or mental and physical disabilities, individuals with a history of incarceration or involvement in the justice system, youth with a history of interaction with DCF, the Department of Children and Families, the elderly, and the agricultural workforce also we need to pay attention to here, in addition to groups that were already named in our statute. We list a variety of partners that we shall work with. I can say the staff could speak more to this, but we do work with these partners. This is just saying that the legislature is asking us all to work together more to identify and propose projects to be awarded funding. And here's some more examples of the work we'd like to do or are starting to do. Identify public land and buildings in areas designated for the development of housing to integrate housing for members from historically marginalized or disadvantaged communities into neighborhoods and communities. Support cooperative management or ownership. Integrate community resources. Co-locate health resources, workforce development opportunities, or food access. Provide for circular waste management and energy production and storage within the project or neighborhood, and propose additional incentives for public-private partnerships and coordinated development of the neighborhood surrounding this infrastructure. So really, we're talking about assisting in a new wave of development in Vermont that we're currently partaking or embarking on, but taking it to a new level, really thinking creatively about how we integrate people and resources into our neighborhoods and communities during this wave of development, and how we build in a way that creates infrastructure that is both physical and social, that lasts a very long time, that is sustainable, that is affordable, that's resilient. And the way I think of it is we want to take resources and invest them in a way so that people can become more self-sufficient from that initial investment. That one-time money can seed a community so that that garden can grow, and then people can harvest the seeds of that garden and plant it further locally. And that's really the kind of vision that we have been talking about doing. So the next section 4 is a preservation of affordable housing tax report. This committee has seen this idea before from me, which is asking the Department of Taxes, in collaboration with the Joint Fiscal Office, to give a report to the legislature by next year, and by July 1st of next year of 2027. And this report would look at tax incentives and penalties that might preserve affordable housing in Vermont. So these could be, we would ask that the report consider various definitions and measurements of affordability, including the basic needs budget. And I say affordability meaning for tenants. That we consider variables that impact the price of rent for property owners, including the cost and benefits of rent pricing. So we're looking at what is actually affordable, what is driving the price of rent right now? You know, what are the variables that are causing rent to rise and to be set the way it is? Projecting how incentives for affordable rent might amplify existing tax benefits. So it's already a tax benefit for a landowner if they keep their rent low, because less income means less taxes usually, you know, and um, and then also expenses, like certain expenses can be a benefit and some are not so much a benefit. So like those factors are already playing in to the pricing of rent. So we would want to study here how incentives might amplify existing benefits first. Then we would want to look at how penalties on rent might deter an owner from charging excessive rent. How tax incentives for property owners giving the tenants the right of first refusal might increase home ownership for tenants. So maybe we give a tax break if you sell your property to your tenant, you know, in that process. Maybe that's a way to promote it versus forcing people to give their tenants the right of first refusal, which I would support personally. But if that's controversial, maybe we just create a choice that that a landlord can make. Do they sell it to their tenant and get a tax break? And maybe we sweeten the deal so it's actually worth it to them to make that choice. And then last but not least, there's two more. Recommend options and opportunities to give advantageous tax treatment to properties owned by marginalized or disadvantaged Vermonters. This aligns with the originating statute of the board. The board was asked to do this, but doesn't really have the ability to. So this report would give the board information to work with around that piece. And then projecting the fiscal impacts of these various incentives and penalties on the revenue of the state. It would be important to understand if we're giving tax breaks for these kinds of transactions, that how is that going to affect our overall general fund and our overall tax base? Because if we give too many tax breaks, then there won't be money to fund things. So there has to be a balance, and we acknowledge that here. And so before I move on to the final section, I would just say that this piece here seems very relevant to the work you've been doing on tenants' rights and on the experience of tenants and tenant-landlord relationships. And you know, if other pieces of the bill don't fit in your work this year, I would encourage you to consider taking this piece and finding a way to make this fit. Because if we could come back in a year, whoever comes back from this group, maybe we all come back, maybe only some of us or none of us, but like when the legislature reconvenes in a year, if the legislature had information about how the tax system could be used to promote home ownership, promote affordable rent, that could improve the experience for tenants. And the more owner occupied property we have, the more we're building wealth at a broader level and building equity. And I think that that's something that we should be considering moving forward as we try to dig our way out of the housing crisis. So this Section 5 Land Security Working Group, our staff suggested this based on work that they have done this year with a variety of partners. And the Land Security Working Group, I'm not going to read the membership in detail right now. That's something that could happen and walk through, but you see the membership of this working group. There are a vast array of members. I'm seeing 18 from various stakeholder groups. The powers and duties would be to provide an assessment and recommendations regarding the following: disparate economic and environmental justice impacts of Vermont's land use and conservation policies and regulations, including Act 250, 2024 Acts and Resolves number 181 and other relevant policies, and identification and protection of agricultural land for community food security purposes. And a report would be submitted to the General Assembly in December of 2026. And then you see it has the standard boilerplate language around, you know, who starts the meeting, how they're run, quorum. That's the stuff Ledge Council could go through with you in a walkthrough if you took up this section, and you could consider it. We do suggest that members of the working group are paid if they're not otherwise eligible for pay. And I highlight that because that would be the component of this piece that would cost money. There would also be an expense associated with any kind of report or study. Just to be straightforward about that. How much it would cost, I think you'd need to hear from JFO what they would project it would cost to study tax incentives and penalties. And obviously the fund part, you know, this committee is already weighing in on appropriations for the Land Access and Opportunity Board, and that would be interconnected with those decisions. So I covered the bill without trying. It's been 15 minutes, so I went 5 minutes longer. You said 10 to 15. I was aiming for 10. I want to make sure that people have a minute for questions. I feel like I've covered the basics of it though, and hoping that people get the gist of the idea and can take these ideas into consideration in your work. If you choose not to move on this bill and the things you are working on, consider how these ideas can fit into that. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Rep. Gina. Does anybody have any questions? Awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming in last minute and being available via Zoom, as you're also available on Zoom upstairs. So definitely we'll be talking about some of the bills on our wall. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, committee, we have a break until 11:10, and the chair should be back by then. But we are going to be hearing from Commissioner Farrell from the Department of Housing and Community Development, and Catherine Dimitrek, and she's Northwest Regional Planning Commission. We're going to be talking about those housing targets we talked about yesterday. Are there any other thoughts? Awesome. We can adjourn until